Deputy U.S. Marshal Len Kelly put his bag on the floor and turned on the light in the hallway of the apartment in Silver Springs, Maryland, which he shared with his wife. Len was surprised to see his wife sitting on the couch in pitch darkness and waiting for him. There is a glass of wine on the coffee table in front of her, and her red, swollen eyes and a napkin clutched in her hand indicate that something bad has happened. Finding his wife at home, Len was somewhat surprised. Congresswoman Juliana Diaz-Rojas, popularly known as KHDR, was rarely at home these days. After winning a second term a few months ago, the junior congresswoman from Chicago has become an increasingly sought-after speaker. As the de facto leader of the blue team of young progressive members of the House of Representatives, Julia was a welcome guest on various round-the-clock talk shows that filled the television universe. Her youth, beauty, passion, and eloquence made her naturally suitable for television. Putting on glasses, she got a bedtime image of a librarian, and she turned the heads of both the audience and the interviewers. "Hi, baby. I'm surprised you're home. What happened? Looks like you're having a hard day. Len, please sit down. There's something we need to discuss." "That doesn't sound too good," Landon said, sitting down in the brown leather armchair that had become his since they got married 9 months ago. "There's an article in the Walpo Washington Post tomorrow morning that says I'm having an affair," Julia said. "And with whom?" The Post hints. "Are you having an affair?" Landon asked, not at all embarrassed. "With the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Dennis Kilgallen," Julia replied. "What? You must be joking. Why did they think you were having an affair with this jerk? He's old enough to be your father. In fact, even older. Besides, he is one of the most right-wing, reactionary jerks in the whole party of right-wing reactionary jerks. Why did the Post assume that you were having an affair with him?" Julia clutched the napkin in her hands, tears streaming down her face. Her pained expression almost made Len throw up. "You must be kidding me. Are you really making love to this jerk? With all the opportunities to be a cheater, do you choose a bastard who is about to blow up your career? How long have you been making love to him? And who else are you making love to behind my back?" Landon was as angry as Julia had ever seen him. She knew he had every right to be upset, but he had no right to lash out at her or call her names. Landon got up and walked through the living room to the bathroom. Julia saw him wash his face and then put his hands on either side of the wash basin, lowering his head, and took a deep breath trying to calm down. She was actually hurt for her husband, even though she understood that she was the source of his pain. "I know we have a lot to talk about, but I haven't eaten anything since breakfast. I could use a burger from the visit. We can park at Langley Oaks and end this conversation without unnecessary emotion." After Landon walked through the burger joint in McLean, he parked his Bronco in a deserted parking lot near the George Washington Memorial Park. They took a table with an open view of the Potomac, and no one nearby bothered them. To the left and behind them was the George W. Bush Intelligence Center. Under other circumstances, it would be a romantic place to sit and look at the river. After the meal was over, Landon started talking again. "I was shocked when you told me about it at home, and I'm not sure that I remembered everything. And here we are, in Virginia, with a view of the Potomac in front of us, and no one bothers us. Tell me everything." Julia started. She and the rest of the blue team members pushed forward their signature bill, the one that was supposed to completely overhaul the healthcare system in the United States. Since the Senate is led by Democrats and the House of Representatives is led by Republicans, it is almost impossible to get any meaningful legislation passed. And this bill was supposed to be the most important one passed in the last 50 years. You know, we have the best doctors in the United States, but the worst healthcare system in the world. We are the most developed country the world has ever known, but we rank 56th in terms of mortality. 55 countries with better mortality rates than ours have some form of universal health care. Somewhere, someone decided that access to health care should be linked to work. There is no such thing in any other country. We have an amazing bill that will completely change the healthcare system in this country, and the right wants to block it. Landon had heard Julia's impassioned speech so many times that he no longer considered it touching, but rather an annoying rant. He agreed with her, but privately believed that she and the blue team were trying to attack the windmills. If you can earn money by maintaining the status quo, then the status quo will be preserved. He allowed Julia to rant a little and blow off steam, and then gently brought her back to the subject. So, how does the work on the adoption of this bill lead to the fact that you and the motherfucking speaker have to make love? Julia blushed at the question. It was moving gradually, and then suddenly it piled on. We have been meeting for several weeks to discuss the bill. In private, he admitted that the bill was good, but that he could not support it publicly. Over the past 3 months, we've had half a dozen meetings to try to come to an understanding. And you succeeded? Landon asked. Have you come to an understanding? Landon's sarcasm did not escape Julia. Our last meeting was 2 days ago. He invited me to his townhouse to finalize an informal agreement. He cannot support the bill publicly, but agreed that his party in the House of Representatives would not actively fight it. They will speak softly about the high cost and lack of choice, but they will not fight us. To celebrate, we opened a bottle of wine. When they finished it, he opened another one. Julia looked down at her hands, which were still clutching the napkin she had brought from home. We must have had too much to drink, because the next thing I remember, I woke up in bed with him. Julia sobbed softly as she talked about it. Julia sobbed and shook her head, looking at her hands. Okay, you slept with that jerk. And where was his wife when he used you? She was visiting her sister in Ohio, Julia said. Good timing, Landon said. And how did this lead us to the Washington Post having the story? I think a reporter was watching his house. They have photos of me arriving in the evening and leaving the next morning in the same clothes. Another damn good thing, Landon said. Do you think I was framed? Julia asked. Did Dennis set me up to dump me? I doubt that this idiot is smart enough to organize something like this. But someone did it. Jack thought for a moment before asking the next question. How do you know that the Post has an article and photos? They called both our offices looking for comments. We denied that there was anything, and then they emailed the photos. Those were time-stamped and looked pretty bad. I look like I've been squeezed out. Landon rolled his eyes at her description of himself. Exactly what every husband wants to hear. His wife was harshly beaten to a sweat by another man. And what's your plan? What are you and Dennis going to do now? That's where I need you, Julia said. When I make a statement to Walpo, I need you to make it too. You will say that you knew that I stayed the night with Congressman Kilgallen and his wife in their guest room after the evening meeting. You see, they don't know that his wife wasn't in town. If both spouses make statements in our support, then the whole thing will be forgotten. Julia leaned over the console, took Landon's right hand, and looked at him seriously. Everything will return to normal. Landon thought for a moment before answering. If I agree to this, I need complete honesty on your part. This is the only chance for amnesty. I'm going to ask you a few questions about what's bothering me. I know some things, and I suspect some things. You don't know what it is. So this is your only chance for forgiveness. Do you understand? Julia understood Landon, but she wasn't happy about it. What if I don't want to answer the question? Then I won't testify. In addition, I will inform the Post that I am filing for divorce. Julia gasped. You won't do that. It will ruin my political future. Then you better be damn honest about your answers, Landon said. He noted that she was worried about her political future, but did not mention the impact on her marriage. Julia nodded in reluctant agreement. Question number 1. Have you had sex with any man or men other than me or the Viagra congressman since we got married? Tears welled up in Julia's eyes as she nodded. Pedro Luis Malvano and Brett Etchley, Yankees third baseman and A-list actor. Damn it, Landon shook his head. I suspected it because I knew that you follow each other on social networks, but I had no idea about Etchley. He just won an Oscar for directing. Remember, I was invited to the awards ceremony, but you couldn't go. Lon nodded. I remember. I had to transport that serial rapist from Richmond to Omaha. Looking at his wife, Landon shook his head in disappointment. While I was transporting a dangerous criminal, you were nailed by some shitty actor from Boston. Married, if I remember correctly. We've only been married 9 months. 9 fucking months, and you've already made love to 3 other men. Maybe several times. Landon's shoulders slumped. He thought about not asking the last question. He went over the pros and cons in his mind before making a decision. Okay, Julia, one last question. How did you provide for yourself in law school? And don't tell me that working as a bartender. I know that's what it says in your official biography, but I also know that it's complete nonsense. Please don't make me say that, Lynn. If we stop now, we can go to counseling and work on our marriage. I love you. We can fix everything. Answer the question, Julia. If I ask this question confidently, then I know more than you think. Julia looked unhappy as she stared out the side window of Land's Bronco. Depending on the situation, she murmured. I didn't hear what you said, Julia. Can you repeat that? Depending on the situation, she shouted. I'm a kept woman. Here, are you happy? I was a kept woman. Creepy old men paid for me to use them. Julia started sobbing so hard that Lynn was afraid she was going to hyperventilate. I think it's good practice to be a kept woman before getting together with an old balls congressman, Landon said. Julia started crying even harder. It's okay, baby, Landon said. I just wanted to make sure you could be honest with me. It's over. I don't have any more questions. Landon put the Bronco in gear and drove home. When they crossed the Virginia border and returned to Maryland and home, Landon's mouth twisted into a smile for a split second. Julia didn't have a question as to why Landon hadn't asked for the reporter's contact information. At noon the next day, Landon met John Moody at a deli on K Street. Marshall Kelly, it's nice to finally meet you, the reporter said. I wish I could say the same thing, Landon replied. He sat down, took off his Stetson, and put it upside down on the chair next to him. Moody nodded. I can understand that. Believe it or not, I can assess your situation. 3 months ago, my wife left me when I found out that she was having an affair with a married boss. He is still married. She lives in a studio apartment, barely makes ends meet, and waits for him to leave his wife. It sucks. Does his wife know? Landon asked. Not yet. His wife is pregnant. I'm going to wait until she has a baby and then blow up this asshole's life. But I don't want to risk the baby. You're a good man, Landon said. What's wrong with people? Don't cheat, and if you want to use someone else, just leave. John opened his notebook and said, Hey, Marshall, before we start, I need to know where a deputy marshal can meet, much less marry a congressional woman. And not just a congresswoman, on the most beautiful one in Washington. Landon smiled. At the bookstore. We both have a degree in literary studies. We both reached for a copy of My Wicked Ways. This is a collection of poems by Sandra Cisneros. Wow, I never would have thought you were a poetry lover, Moody laughed. I'm not, Landon said. I just stood a meter away from her and recognized her even in a Cubs baseball cap and sunglasses. Out of the corner of my eye, I followed her hand and guessed which book she was probably going to take. It just so happened that I reached for the same book as her at the same time. A coincidence, you know. Landon smiled, remembering how he had feigned interest in Sandra Cisneros for the chance to talk to Julia. Moody laughed. Subtle, he said. You look like Raylan Givens. Hat, badge, and all that U.S. Marshal vibe. Cool and calm. I have a feeling that KHDR didn't know what to expect. When we met, she had been in this position for only a couple of months. Before we got married, we dated for over a year and a half. Her authority was constantly growing, and with it her ego. Sometimes I think she considered me part of her staff. After a couple of months, I closed this topic. She apologized and promised to improve. And since then there has been marital bliss, right? Landon grinned mirthlessly as he pushed the flash drive towards Moody. I wouldn't say that. No, I wouldn't say that. Moody took the flash drive and examined it as if he had never seen it before. So, what's on it? He asked. I recorded a conversation between Julia and me last night, Landon replied. Marshall Kelly, I am grateful to you for contacting me last week. What you told me about what you assumed was going to happen when you left town was brilliant. When you told me there would be a confrontation when you got home last night, I had no idea what to expect. But not this one. Moody slid the flash drive across the table back to Landon. Marshall, this doesn't suit me. I can't use it. Oh, you will definitely be able to use it. Without a doubt. 100% guarantee. Moody shook his head. Everything that you recorded at home, I can't use. Without your wife's consent. Landon smiled. Believe me, you can use it. Good. Marshall Kelly, why are you so sure that I can use this recording? Because last night when I got home, I wanted to go to the burger, Landon said. Oh. Moody said, confused by the sudden change. I don't understand. Have you ever eaten at the burger? Landon asked. The best cheeseburgers in 3 states. Yes, they are great, but I don't understand what your desire for a burger has to do with this record. Landon smiled. Although there are several burgers in Maryland, I prefer the one in McLean. In Virginia. The reporter stared blankly at Landon for 3 heartbeats before it hit him. Holy fucking shit. Moody looked at Landon in awe. Did you force her to voluntarily leave the state with bilateral consent, go to the state with unilateral consent, and record her confession? Sir, I respect you. Landon smiled bitterly. I would prefer to have a faithful wife. Moody plugged the USB stick into his computer, plugged in his headphones, and started listening and taking notes. Landon began to fatally scroll through the topic of infidelity on his iPhone while sipping coffee. When the recording ended, Moody shook his head and looked at Landon with admiration. Dude, that was really impressive. What she confessed to would blow her career to hell. But what about you two? How can you stay married if you let me do it? What is it? He asked, pointing to the flash drive. Stay married? I'm not going to stay married to her. But you said you'd forgive her if she answered your questions. Did you lie to her? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Landon said, raising his right hand to make the sign of the cross in the air above their table, pronouncing a Latin phrase, the only Latin he had learned after a million views of the Saints of Boondock. Moody nodded his head. So you'll forgive her, but you'll get divorced and ruin her career. In response, Landon imitated the mushroom explosion, spreading his arms and said, Bang! Landon turned off his phone as soon as he left the deli, so he didn't know about the messages, missed calls, and voicemails from his wife. He knew that the Post was heavily advertising an exclusive bombshell report for the morning papers. The promo videos hinted that there was something between the CDR and the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The promo videos made all the major newspapers and news stations rush to find out what Walpo has and where it comes from. In the offices of both members of the House of Representatives and Congress, the phones were ringing off the hook. Their employees were stunned and handed out rebuttals right and left. Congresswoman Diaz-Rojas was sitting in her office with Chief of Staff and Congresswoman Fatima Alamu, an Ethiopian-born second-year legislator from Colorado. Fatima was part of the blue team and ranked second after KHDR in terms of the number of copies in the media. I can't believe you had sex with Kilgallen, Fatima said. How does it feel? JD gave her friend a sour look. It's terrible, and I barely remember it. He's definitely Irish, she said, holding her thumb and forefinger 5 centimeters apart. Isn't your husband Irish? Rose Hunt, her head of human resources, asked. Landon must have some Latin blood in him, because he's definitely not as Irish as the Speaker, Julia giggled. That's what Landon called him when I confessed last night. I still can't believe you told him everything, Rose said. While I would try to keep everything a secret from the public, did you go and confess everything to your husband? What if he divorces you? He's already said he'll forgive me. We'll all start with a clean slate, and I'll be the best wife in the world. Until you stop, Fatima laughed. Until I stop, Julia agreed. Senate Minority Leader Norman Newman was furious as he walked into the office of House Speaker Dennis Kilgallen. What a damn half-wit, he thought. If he really used HDR, then his tiny Irish balls will be hanging on my rearview mirror. Norm didn't bother to knock, bursting into the Speaker's office. Dennis Kilgallen was sitting with his arm around Fred Ford, his chief of staff, on a $20,000 white leather Sakati sofa paid for by U.S. taxpayers. Tears were streaming down Kilgallen's face as he looked at Senator Newman. I didn't think anyone would find out about this, he muttered. It will kill me at home. Norm felt no sympathy. So what happened? Did you think you'd snatch some Mexican girl for yourself and no one would find out? Actually, I think the Congresswoman is Puerto Rican, Fred said. Newman looked at Kilgallen's chief of staff with annoyance. Did you think you were going to snatch some Latin girl? Is that better, boobies? He snapped, looking from Kilgallen to his chief of staff. Fred knew that the best answer to this question was the absence of any answer. What should I do? Kilgallen groaned. Does Walpo have anything on you? They have photos of a fool coming to my house and leaving in the same clothes the next morning. My wife was in Ohio, but no one knows about it. She testified that she was at home and that nothing happened. It cost me another prenup. Kilgallen had a bitter, resigned expression on his face. That's good. Your wife is covering your stupid ass. So, what else do you have? Will she confirm? And what about her husband? Isn't he the sheriff or something? He's a deputy U.S. Marshal, Fred said. Like in that TV show. Senator Newman had no idea what the motherfucker's chief of staff was talking about. The only television he watched was Fox News, and he was almost done with them. Ever since Booker Henderson was fired for saying live on air that Hitler had been grossly vilified by the mainstream media and that slavery was a misunderstood social institution, Newman has stopped watching them. Newman rolled his eyes at Chief of Staff Kilgallen and made a mental note to talk to the motherfucker about replacing his Chief of Staff. Norm has a nephew who is looking for a job after recently being fired. Julia was going to talk to him last night, tell him what was going on, and ask him to give a statement to the Post. She is almost sure that he will agree to confirm the testimony. Are you almost sure? Newman repeated. Is she going to tell her husband that she made love to a congressman, who, by the way, is despised by her constituents, and he will put up with it and won't mind? He shot Kilgallen an incredulous look. That's what she said. Congressman Kilgallen stared sullenly out the window, overlooking the Capitol territory. In order to become Speaker of the House of Representatives, he needed 35 votes from members of Congress. None of the Democrats and very few of his own party wanted to see him as Speaker. Some members of his own party even voted for people who were not members of the House, instead of voting for him. During the early voting, even Vladimir Putin received 3 votes for the post of Speaker, and someone wrote Hitler's ass instead of his voice. Kilgallen was still angry about it. He didn't know if it was a real vote for part of Hitler's anatomy, or if someone had come up with a new nickname for him as Speaker of the House of Representatives. Anyway, since it wasn't a vote for Dennis Kilgallen, he was against him. To secure the post of Speaker of the House, he sold his soul to the far-right wing of the party. The thought that he might lose this position because of her was a bitter pill to swallow. Senator Newman stared at Kilgallen in silence as he sat and sobbed. He didn't think he'd ever seen a more pathetic sight in Washington, at least since John Boehner became Speaker and was forced to show photos of his new son-in-law. Julia was furious when she returned home to her apartment in Silver Springs. Her husband did not answer calls or text messages. She found the Walpole reporter's contact information and realized that Landon hadn't asked about it. How was he going to contact John Moody without having a name or contact information? Landon wasn't at home, but he left a note on the kitchen table. Julia, he is forced to leave the city, accompanying Maurice Bendrix to Washington. I'll be back in a couple of days. Landon. The note made Julia even more annoyed, but it explained why Lon wasn't responding. If he's in the air, he's out of touch. Julia decided to call reporter John Moody herself. Hi, John, she said when he answered. This is Juliana Diaz-Rojas. Did my husband manage to give you an interview? We talked. Julia noticed that his answer was a little restrained. So you figured out that he knew I was spending the night with Congressman Kilgallen and his wife. Like I said, we talked, Moody replied. Julia felt the first waves of panic rising. What did my husband tell you? Didn't he make it clear that he knew about my visit? I think this is a conversation you need to have with your husband, he replied and hung up. Julia looked at her phone in shock. She had never had a reporter hang up on her. She took Landon's note and reread it. He had never mentioned the name of the prisoner he was transporting before. She Googled Maurice Bendrix, but the only mention she found was a character in Graham Greene's novel The End of the Novel, which she vaguely remembered was about infidelity. Julia suddenly felt dizzy and sat down heavily on the sofa. If the previous day was an 8 on the 1 to 10 chaos scale, then today is 100,000. Reporters were everywhere. Calls had to be dropped or the phone disconnected. The story in the Post appeared this morning, first in the online edition and then in print. When Julia arrived at her office, the Senate Majority Leader was waiting for her. She felt depressed, and she barely had the strength to walk from the car to the office. She recognized the onset of depression and felt helpless to do anything about it. The last person she wanted to meet was Senator Skip Siegel. Siegel entered Julia's office with her, telling his chief of staff to leave them alone. Is there anything else we need to talk about? The confession your husband recorded was quite comprehensive. I've never heard of anyone destroying their marriage and career so thoroughly. I'm almost in awe. It's like you developed a plan and stuck to it. First of all, how to destroy your marriage. Admit to cheating? There is. Admit that she worked as a cheater? There is. Then you said to yourself, hey, it's not enough that I'm ruining my marriage, but how can you set my career on fire? Treason? It happened. Prostitution? Yes, please. Sign me up. Skip Siegel looked at Julia and shook his head in mock admiration, as if he were the love child of Wilbur Mills and Gary Condit. Julia sat at her desk and looked sullenly at Senator Siegel. She had no idea who these two people were, but she knew that she had just been insulted. So, what about the healthcare bill that you were so desperate to pass? You know he's completely failed, right? This country was the closest to making full-fledged healthcare a law for the country, and it failed because you couldn't keep your legs together. And then they confessed everything to their husband. Skip Siegel looked at Julia and shook his head, thinking that everything was in vain, while she sobbed at her desk. And what happens now? Coleman Cole, Kelly asked his cousin. He and Landon were sipping bourbon on the spacious porch of the Kelly family ranch. Landon arrived last night, and Cole arrived this morning. Landon took a sip of his Milam and green triple cask bourbon and sighed. Texas distilleries began producing the world's best whiskey to drink. And for his money, the three ladies behind Milam and Green made the best of the best. At least a divorce, he replied. I'm not sure that her career will survive this, but again, I don't care much about it. I have an appointment with Darjan Sullivan from the Family Law Department at BMCG to get started. I'll take a couple of weeks off to go fishing and relax. Cole nodded. He was a special agent of the Army Criminal Investigation Department and currently served at Fort Cavazos. It was convenient for the family ranch, which was 50 miles southwest of Austin and a couple of hours away from the base. Cole was a frequent visitor to the ranch to see his adopted sister and grandmother, and sometimes his father, who lived in Austin itself. Cole took a sip of bourbon. He sympathized with his cousin. He himself had problems with his wife before. I could take a few days off. We could spend a few days riding on the ranch. How long has it been since you got on a horse? I bet living in a condo has made you soft. You know, riding around the ranch sounds good, but I haven't ridden in a long time. I think that's what I need, to trade one pain for a pain in the ass. Landon took another sip of whiskey and sighed.